Factoring with 4 terms. Usually when you have a polynomial that has 4 terms, you're going to be looking at something that most often has a degree of 3 or higher. Occasionally you'll have something like down here where there's not, but usually you're looking at something with the higher degrees. Now an x to the third I can't use a snowflake on, right? I can only use it on x to the second. If it's x to the second, I have to have that pattern that we talked about yesterday where the second term has to be half the degree of the first term. Again, it can only be a trinomial for me to be able to use the snowflake. So what do we do when there are 4 terms? Well, we're going to use this method called grouping. It says grouping or box. I'm not going to go into the box. I'm just going to stick with grouping because I think it's easy as it is. So I have my 4 terms. What do we call something with 4 terms again? Quadrinomial. And here's how I do grouping. It's really difficult. You ready? I'm going to start off by cutting this in half. That was sarcasm, by the way. It's not really difficult. So I have 2 terms and then 2 terms. I'm breaking it up into smaller pieces. Right here, I'm going to look at those first 2 terms. If I was just to look at those first 2 terms, what do those 2 terms have in common? A 3 and x squared. Now, something I should have asked beforehand, and I didn't, is do all 4 terms have something in common that I should have taken out to begin with? No, because that 10 is not divisible by 3, so it kind of messes me up. All right, so thankfully I was covered there. If I took 3x squared out of those 2 terms, what would be left inside now? 3x minus 2. Okay, so far so good. Now I'm going to look at the second 2 terms. Now one thing that's key is I'm going to take out something that they have in common, but the sign of what I take out is determined by whatever this first sign is here. So since this first one is negative, then whatever number I take out, I'm going to have to take out the negative of that number. So what do 15x and 10 have in common? And I have to take out a negative 5 because of that sign right there. What would be left inside then? 3x, what? Now a lot of people are tempted to put a plus 2 because that's a plus. But there's a problem. I took out a minus. So I need to put a minus 2 so that way the negative 5 times the negative 2 gets me that positive 10. So I have to be careful there. Now, if I did this correctly, I should notice something about those 2 parentheses. They're the same. That means I did it correctly. That's a good thing. Now, this is the part that always messes people up. They see 3x minus 2 twice, so they want to write it twice in their answer. Well, these 2 parentheses actually just become 1. And I'll explain why in just a minute. The other parentheses is what I was distributing out here. So that would be 3x squared minus 5. That's my answer. Not too bad? Every one of those is done the exact same way. Now let me explain why you only write the 3x minus 2 once. Do you remember when I taught the multiplying polynomials using the distributive method? Not the box method, but the distributive method. If I were to multiply these 2 polynomials, I took the 3x squared, I pretended like this second term didn't exist, and I distributed 3x squared through 3x minus 2. Do you remember that? This represents that. 3x squared being distributed to that 3x minus 2. Then I pretended like the 3x squared didn't matter, or wasn't there, and I took the negative 5 and distributed it. Do you see that that's what's represented right there? So even though it's listed twice, the reason it's listed twice is because since this first one was a binomial, I had to distribute 2 different things. Does that kind of make sense? So that's why it's written twice there, but in the answer it's really only represented once. Okay? Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. All right, let's move on. Let's look at this guy. What do I do first? Well, first I should look and see, do they have anything in common? All four terms. Not looking super helpful there for me, okay? So what should I do then? I start off by cutting it in half. First two terms in one group, second two terms in the other group. And I look right here. What do those two terms have in common? 5x cubed, okay? What would be left inside? X squared minus 2, okay? Now let's look at these next guys. What sign am I going to bring down? The plus, because that's what it is right there. What do these two terms have in common? 4y, and then what would be left inside? X squared minus 2. Do I have my matching ones? Yep, that's a good thing. So what would my answer be? One of my parentheses is going to be 5x to the third plus 4y. And what's the other one? X squared minus 2, and I only list it once. The only reason it's listed twice is because there were two things distributed to it. Now, I really should check and see, can I go any further? Because this almost makes me want to think difference of squares, but it's not a difference of squares, is it? If that was x squared minus 4, I could do a little bit more, couldn't I? But as it is, I can't do anything more there. Okay? So? Yes? No? Good. All right, next one. This one isn't a third degree. Let's see how this one works out. What is my starting point? My starting point, is there something that all of the terms have in common? No. Okay, what's my next step then? Cut it in half. What do my first two terms have in common that I should take out? 3x, and what would be left inside? X minus 2. Okay? What sign am I going to bring down? Since this is a minus, I bring down a negative. And what do those two terms have in common? 5a. What would be left inside? X. You're tempted to say plus, aren't you? Because of that, but it has to be a minus 2 because I took out that negative. So if I think backwards, a negative times a negative gets me that positive. Do I have my parentheses matching? Yes. So if you had x plus 2, hopefully when you checked for matching parentheses, you would notice that you did something wrong there. All right, so one of my sets of parentheses in my answers is 3x minus 5a. And what's the other one? X minus 2. Now, could I check my answer? Absolutely. On all of these, you can check your answer. How do you do that? Multiply it all out, and if you did it correctly, you should get exactly the terms you began with. Okay? All right, why don't you take a minute and try these two. Follow the same method. You take a minute and try those ones. All right, so let's go ahead and work through those ones. Starting right here. Is there something that all four terms have in common? No. Okay, so what do I do next? Cut it in half. What do my first two terms have in common? 6a cubed. What would be left inside? 7a minus 3. Okay. What sign would I bring down? The plus. And what do these two have in common? A 5. What would be left inside? 7a minus 3. Do I have my matching parentheses? Yes. You always want to check that. So, what's my final answer going to look like? 6a cubed plus 5 is one of my parentheses, and 7a minus 3 is my other one. Doesn't matter if you write your 7a minus 3 parentheses before your 6a cubed plus 5 one. Doesn't matter. Okay? As long as you've got the same two parentheses. All right, next one. Is there something that all four have in common? No? Okay. So what do I do next? Cut it in half. What do these two have in common? X squared. Okay, what's left inside then? 7x plus 6. All right, what sign am I bringing down? Negative. What do these two have in common? 3. And what's left inside? Not minus 6. Plus 6. Again, you took out that negative sign, so that has to be a positive so that when you multiply them, you still get a negative up here. Do I have my matching parentheses? Yep. So my final answer looks like x squared minus 3 and 7x plus 6. Questions over those two? All right, you try the last two. The last two are a little bit trickier. Go ahead and take a minute and try those two. Okay, so let's start right here. Okay, if I were to start with this and I were to start by, let's see, if I cut these in half, what do these first two terms have in common? I see 6x cubed. What would be left inside? 10x plus 6. Uh-oh. There's a problem. Because I have something in common still there, right? So I didn't take out a big enough number. So let's start over again. I wanted to show you this so that you can see what happens if you make a mistake. So let's see. Bigger than 6, what do they have in common? 12. So I can take out a 12x cubed. And what's left inside? 5x plus 3. Now, something I didn't do in the very first step is I didn't take out what all four terms have in common, did I? So if I forget to do that in the first step, I'm going to show you how you can do that later. Okay? So yes, I forgot to do that, and I did that kind of intentionally because I want to show you what happens at the end and how you can fix it without having to go back and do the whole thing over again. Okay? All right, so I'm good there. What sign am I going to bring down from my second one? Minus. What do these two have in common? Biggest number they have in common?
8.
Bigger than 8. Because if I took out an 8, that leaves me with 10x, well, it would be 8x, right? 10x plus 6. We got to go bigger than 8. 16. 16 times what is negative 80x squared? Actually, it's 16x, isn't it?
Yeah.
Don't forget that x. All right, what do I get then? 5x, and then what? Plus, so that I can still get that minus. And 16x times 3 gives me 48x. Do I have my matching parentheses? Yes, so that's a good thing. And so my ending part would be 12x cubed minus 16x, and then 5x plus 3. Now I said I'd show you what to do if you forgot to take something out in the first step. If you forgot to take something out in the first step, then one or both of your parentheses still have something in common. So take it out now at the very end. What do these two terms have in common? 4 and x. What's left inside here? 3x squared minus 4. And then this guy just kind of stays as is. We're just taking out of that first parentheses. So if you took it out at the beginning, you should have this as your answer. If you didn't take it out at the beginning, then you need to end up here at the very end. Does that make sense? All right, last one. Is this one making anyone else go blind? Hopefully your copy's better than mine. Mine looks like it shifted a little. It's kind of double vision here. All right, is there anything that all of those terms have in common? 6y squared. Okay, so let's see. 6y squared. What's 96 divided by 6? I don't know that off the top of my head. That would be 16 what? x to the third minus 10x to the second plus 8x minus 5. So far, so good? So that will need to be in my final answer. What do I do in here? They don't have anything in common, so what do? Cut it in half. What do those two have in common? 2x squared, and what would be left inside? 8x minus 5. Okay, what sign do I bring down? Bring down the plus. What do these two have in common? They have nothing in common, it looks like, right? Now, technically, every single number has something in common. And if it's nothing else, then it's 1 that they have in common. So if there's no other numbers that you can find that they have in common, you need to put a 1, because they do technically have 1 in common. So what would be left inside if I took out a 1? 8x minus 5. Do I have my matching parentheses? Yes. So let's see. I end up with 2x squared plus 1 and 8x minus 5. And I can't forget that at the very beginning I need the 6y squared. Okay. Any questions there? Yes.
So it's better to have 12x squared on the top off inside instead of having that like 6y squared outside?
Yes. So if you're down at the very bottom and you still have things in common in parentheses like I did here, you have to take more out. Okay? At the very end, you should be at a place where there is nothing in common left in parentheses. Okay? All right. Happy studying.